As Area 2 revealed, and as has been reconfirmed in Area 3, the Roman Catholic Church had turned into a powerful political force by the late Middle Ages, particularly as we think about the years 1200, 1300, 1400. As a result, it should not be a surprise that any attempts to reform the Church often met with great resistance. That didn't stop the calls for reform from coming, however. There were calls for the Pope to focus on more spiritual matters, for the clergy to be reformed, and for corruption within the Church to be weeded out. The most important reform effort for the purposes of this class was the call of some for the Bible to be the central authority for the Church. We see this emphasis on the Bible in the lives of Peter Waldo and his followers. Living several hundred years before the official start of the Protestant Reformation movement under Martin Luther, Waldo believed in the power of Scripture and the need for it to be preached to people in a way that they would understand it. Rather than have worship services conducted in Latin, a language that few spoke at that time, Waldo believed in preaching in the common language of the people, a position that got him condemned by the Catholic Church. We see this emphasis on the Bible in the ministry of John Wycliffe, a Roman Catholic priest and teacher who lived in the late 1300s. He believed that the Church struggled with a variety of issues, in large part because the Church's leadership had lost sight of biblical teachings. He believed that the Bible should be translated into the language of the people, and he worked on one of the earliest translations of the Bible into English. But he also recognized that because most people in his day could not read, they did not have access to the Bible without preachers. That fact spurred him to gather a group of followers whose primary task was traveling and teaching the Bible. Their influence was felt throughout continental Europe, and their influence reached to a pastor and teacher in Bohemia named Jan Hus, or John Huss sometimes. Hus and Wycliffe were common spirits, believing in the primacy of the Bible and the need to organize the Church around biblical teachings. The efforts of Hus to build a platform of reform for the Catholic Church on the teachings of Scripture ultimately failed, and he was killed by the Church as a heretic. We see this priority given to the Bible in the Reformation emphases of Luther, Zwingli, and Calvin. One of the key Reformation refrains was sola scriptura, Scripture alone, which called the Church away from tradition to the Bible as the only source for determining faith and practice. These reformers believed the Bible should be translated and preached. While on the run from Roman Catholic authorities, after having been officially labeled a heretic and excommunicated from the Church, one of Luther's first acts was to translate the New Testament into German in 1521. Zwingli initiated reform efforts at his church in Switzerland by teaching through the Gospel of Matthew. Luther and Calvin both provided extensive commentaries on almost every book of the Bible. Without a doubt, the Bible was formative for the early stages of the Protestant Reformation. Interestingly, and perhaps surprisingly, the beginnings of the Protestant Reformation did not usher in a great Protestant missionary movement. It took another 200 to 300 years for Protestants to catch a vision for global mission work. A lot of the delay, I think, was due to political circumstances of the day. When the Protestant Reformation began, it forged into areas like England, Scotland, parts of Germany, parts of Switzerland, Dutch territories. It forged into these areas where there were political leaders who supported it and were willing to break with the Roman Catholic Church. Rather than being able to turn their attention to growth and missions, however, the early Protestants were more concerned with holding on to their territories and fighting with the Catholics. Times would change eventually.